It is Thursday, March 9th, 2024, and you're watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem, where I report on Asian MMA news week in, week out, year-round, 24/7, or at least my awake hours, which are sometimes wonky when you cover Asian MMA. But nevertheless, welcome to today's podcast, episode 54. Glad you could make it. If it's your first time, I'm going to cover some Asian MMA topics, kind of run down the last week of news, and then take your questions. So if you have those, you can throw them in the chat, and I will get to those later. A couple news items that have gone down in the last 24 hours or so, which it's overall a slower week for Asian MMA. That'll change next week. But if you follow me on Instagram, you saw that Lee Jung-young, the Korean Tiger, really big Korean prospect, maybe like the hottest fighter out of Korea right now. He has his next fight booked in the UFC. That is going to be on July 20th at the UFC Apex, and it's going to be against Haider Amil, an American guy with a Filipino background. I think it's a great fight. Lee Jung-young coming off a unanimous decision, fairly dominant unanimous decision win over Blake Bilder last February. And I think it's fine to give him another guy kind of at the bottom of the featherweight division for now. And let's see, after his last fight, he was critical of his performance, saying he was really trying to get that finish. He does. He's a guy that I think does have a lot of finishing power. And so I think this could be both an exciting fight. I think Haider Amil has a pretty fan-friendly style. And so I think this could be exciting, potentially a finish for Lee Jung-young. But that was reported by Marcel Dorf just a few hours ago. As far as Road to UFC goes, I did see, just minutes before I hopped on here, I saw that the UFC posted an article with all of the fights for Road to UFC. However, oddly enough, they did not include which fights are on which day. Now, I've heard some rumored lineups, and I went ahead and just added those to Tapology since those fall under my jurisdiction. And I added those as best as I could. I don't know if they'll change, but that's the best that I have for now. But a few things with that Road to UFC lineup. No surprises as though, as far as things that I haven't already posted about. But it did confirm that the fighter from Afghanistan, Hamid Amiri, is out of his fight in Road UFC, and replacing him will be Ibu Gola fighting Shebin at featherweight. Honestly, I had people like, as soon as the Hamid Amiri fight was announced, I had people basically like hitting me up saying like, oh, this fight's not going to happen. He's not going to be able to get a visa. We saw this with Abdulazim Badakshi last year. Wasn't able to get a visa out of Road to UFC. And yeah, I guess they just thought that they might have better luck with it. I don't know if it's just Afghanis have a hard time getting visas to China. I could probably imagine a lot of places, but just based on their political situation right now, not a lot of alliances that they have with countries around the world. But too bad for Hamid Amiri. He's a really young guy. I can't be the one to say if he would have stood any kind of chance in Road to UFC, but I still feel bad for the guy getting the opportunity taken away from him. Hopefully he can figure out a path towards being able to travel a little bit more easily, whether that's going somewhere else to train or getting some people on his side. But I hope that what would be great is if he could get a manager that really knows the ins and outs of these, that could kind of hook him up and help him to know how to navigate that. So in his place is Ibu Gola. Ibu Gola is also quarterfinalist on Road to UFC last year. Ultimately didn't win, lost a decision against Koya Kanda in the opening round. Since then, he's won 2 straight, also against Japanese fighters. And I think he's always a great replacement. He's a really experienced guy. He has gone to the top of JCK's system, that promotion. And I think either way, whether or not he has a chance at winning the whole tournament, I think there are fighters that have a shot at winning the whole thing. And then there are other fighters that I think are really experienced that bring up the value of the tournament as a whole. So I think Ibugula is a good guy to, call up on short notice. Adding just one more Chinese fighter to the mix, though, it's got to be like close to 50% Chinese fighters now. But that goes down in just 9 days from now. For Road to UFC, and I'll get to a little bit more news in just a second, but I had planned on sending out 3 videos. I released the flyweight breakdown. I was going to do a featherweight and bantamweight breakdown. And then I was working on several different interviews. And I kind of am at a point where I realized it was earlier this week that I needed to hit pause on, honestly, most of the projects that I've been working on, or not pause, but just release them, just to focus on some stuff in personal life right now. I've got some things going on that are requiring a lot of my attention and a lot of logistics that have to be worked out. And I'm fine. It's fine, but just creating YouTube videos right now is not like a top priority for me to figure out. So it's hard to give that stuff up when you're really excited about it, especially like Road UFC is a time of year I like to really capitalize on. But I think when you're a content creator, especially in the sports industry, that you do have to remind yourself is that it's not worth breaking your back and sacrificing the things in like your life around you. I know other people would say different, but there are sacrifices that have to be taken, but you also have to like be a person and stay alive and do the things that are most important. And things like Road to UFC will always be going on. There's always going to be fights in Asia for me to report on. And so, just need to take a little bit of a pause from right now. I'll try to like focus on website a little bit to build that up. But probably not going to be a lot of YouTube videos besides the weekly podcast, probably through like June, potentially. We'll see what happens. I may be able to crank some stuff out in June. I'd love to make a video for Puja Tomar's UFC debut, but that might be a little bit early, seeing as that's June 8th. But we'll see. Doing all right, and we'll figure it out and be back in full force at least at some point soon. Otherwise, in Asian MMA news this week, we also had the tournament, the tournament bracket posted for Road to UFC. This was on Dean Amisinger's Instagram, and I screenshotted it. I should have sent this over to my computer so I could share it with you. I think the reason I didn't was because it's just not a great quality picture. I'm not sure if you'd be able to see it, but I did post it to my Twitter. It also confirmed that Li Yunfeng is going to be fighting Baragung Jala Isa. And it looks like a lot of the top fighters, at least in my opinion, they've got a lot of times on opposite sides of the bracket. For instance, in flyweight, they've got Jinyu Shirie and Toki Matsui, who are my number 1 and number 2. They're on opposite sides of the bracket. You've also got on opposite sides of I would say at strawweight, most of the top fighters, in my opinion, are on one side of the bracket. You've got Xiao Yadam, Dong Huasheng. That's strawweight, in my opinion, is a little bit more even. The other weight classes, there's some fighters there that I feel like, it's probably going to be 2 of these 3 fighters making it to the top. That one's a little more even. But if you look at bantamweight, I would say my top 2 fighters there, Yusu Young and Baragung Jala Isa, they're on opposite sides of the bracket. And then my top 2 fighters at featherweight would probably top 3 would be Shin Haraguchi, Xie Bin, and Song Young Jae. And Shin Haraguchi is on the opposite side of the bracket from Song Young Jae and Xie Bin. So man, that would be interesting if Song Young Jae and Xia Bin ended up fighting each other in the next round. That'd be pretty cool. So check that out on my Twitter or X if you want to see that. Also, Hiroba Minowa is fighting Jeremy Miyato in one championship on July 5th. Interesting strawweight fight there. I did watch an interview today from Nick Atkin with Sports Kita, where he interviewed Chatri Sitiodong and kind of just ran through a lot of topics, asking about when's this fighter coming back and when is kind of schedule related stuff, which are things that I'm always really interested in. And a few interesting things. He did say that there would be an interim strawweight fight at with Joshua Pasio out with an ACL injury. I think that's the right way to go. It seems like strawweight has been a more quickly moving division than others. He also said that there would be an interim fight at welterweight, considering Christian Lee's next fight is going to take place at lightweight. Kind of hinted at him coming back at the Atlanta show in November. So he would be defending his lightweight belt, meaning the welterweight title isn't even going to be defended for the rest of the year. So he said they've got two guys lined up to fight for the interim belt. Other than that, he said they've soft booked for US shows for 2025. Believe it when I see it. But yeah, I would encourage you to check out the interview as a whole. That's on the Sports Kita channel, I believe. Definitely worth your time. Otherwise, a couple events going on this weekend. Two events from Chinese promotion. You can always count on WKG to deliver the goods. This kind of reoccurring theme of Asian countries or Asian promotions co-promoting with other Asian promotions is definitely in full force this weekend in kind of two different ways. And the first is with WLF, showing you that fight card real quick here, but and I've updated this in the last couple of days with the latest fights. There's a couple more that I saw earlier today that I'm going to add on here. But you've got Miao Jie coming back, and honestly, as many Chinese women that we can have, the better. This is great for Chinese MMA that she's back. I don't know if she'll be, back in the mix with other fighters, but I think this is great to have her back. She's fighting a foreign Kazakh. You can see kind of a China versus Kazakh theme. They're going up against Octagon MMA. They're the ones that sent all these Kazakhs, but we did have Zachil Doji, who's a Tibetan fighter. He was supposed to fight at this event. He is no longer fighting, but we still have Ichi Yebu and we've got Sulong Rambo, some Umbo fight guys. So a couple guys from Umbo fight. I'm always interested to see how they perform, and definitely a great test having them fight Kazakh fighters of similar records. It seems like the matchmaking for this event was pretty good. There's really no one that is fighting someone whose record is just like really different from their own. Granted, the quality of those wins could vary pretty differently, but Feng Peng Chao was recently added this week. Shi Xiao Jun, he's a Tibetan guy out of Umbo Fight. Luo Zhou, he is also same story there, Tibetan guy out of Umbo Fight. So always interested to see how they perform. But the other event that I'm also really excited for this weekend is WKG. Now, they are not, well, I guess they are co-promoting with M1 Global, but because of this, they only usually have one or two shows a year. And when they put on these shows, the quality is usually pretty good. They bring in a lot of international fighters. I don't know how they have connections to all these fighters. I think a lot of them maybe do actually train in China. But here you've got Lee Isak, who I heard was rumored to be on Road to UFC this year. Didn't ultimately pan out. Not a lot. I'm guessing you would have fought at welterweight, and not a lot of spots at welterweight open. But you've got some nuggets in there. Namsrai Bayer, he is a pretty good prospect out of Mongolia. Li Yixun fighting usually at, well, this is at a catchweight fight in between flyweight and strawweight. Lee Sok, you've got that. Mateus Correa, he's a Brazilian guy that trains out of Kaohsiung Gym in Jiangsu province. He's kind of with Polyana Miller, who's a Brazilian strawweight who fights with JCK. The two of them train in Jiangsu province. Good to see Huishi Bai back in action. Solid veteran. Regajun, Tibetan guy out of Umbo fight. Interesting fight against this Kazakh guy, or this Tajik guy. And then the main event, probably the prospect of the weekend out of China, Ahjung Ali Noir. Rumen Faroud UFC as well. I think he passed on it. Maybe going to try to do his own thing and just get a couple fights and sign with the UFC. It's been a while since we've seen him, but I'm glad that he's back in action, fighting a 7-1 Russian, Jasurbek Soberov. So keep your eye on Ahjung Ali Noir this weekend. I will post the links to watch these events, planning on watching both of them live if I can. They do air on Douyin, but I think there's also a couple other links. I saw that this event here is supposed to air live on M1 Global's YouTube channel, which would be fantastic. Best case scenario there. Their last event with WKG also aired live on there, so that would be amazing. Apparently, WKG does have another event planned for May 31st, but I haven't heard anything. I haven't seen anything from the promotion about that. So TBD on that, but it's happening. Just haven't seen any kind of like fight card announced for that, except for the Tai Laka fight. We also have One Pride Fight Night. They took April off, but they're back. So this Saturday in Jakarta, you've got a strawweight title fight. Rustam Hutajulu is defending his belt against Charles Ibu, which I feel like Hutajulu, I think, should win this fight somewhat easily. But he is one of those guys that you wonder if he could go up and make flyweight, not make flyweight, but if he could make it work for him to fight at flyweight. He's even fought at one championship, believe it or not, but he is the One Pride strawweight champion. He's coming off of a win over Billy Passalatan, who also fought Road UFC in the flyweight division. So perhaps Hutajulu, if he wins this fight, maybe another one too, you could see him as like a prospect emerging at flyweight for Indonesia. We need all the Indonesian prospects we can get right now. So that is going down on Saturday from One Pride's YouTube channel. The other two fights, Anga Hans is on there against Supriandri Niabajo. Alan Darmawan out of Bali MMA fighting Farrell Stefan. So that goes down this Saturday from Jakarta. All right, let's get into your questions. Did I ever look deeper into why the UFC got mad at the Denver Commission for sanctioning the One rules? I saw a report that UFC will no longer go to Denver because one got approved there. That is difficult information to dig deeper in, and I don't necessarily have the network to really be able to talk to people why they are upset about that. But let's see how this plays out. This is very interesting with one trying to gain a foothold in the U.S. They have Georgia and Colorado, and with Chaudhry's interview with Nick Atkin, he said that they've got 4 dates in the U.S. booked next year with some different cities, which I feel like they kind of have to do. Like, if you can't expand past two states, Denver and Atlanta, basically. I mean, I guess you could do in Colorado, you could maybe go to Colorado Springs, not that far from Denver. Maybe go to some suburbs of Denver. There's not a whole lot of options. The same thing with Atlanta. There's really not a whole lot of options unless you go to like really small venues in a suburb somewhere. So if you can't expand past those two states, and all you're stuck with is putting on shows in the exact same arena, you're going to see eventually like what happens with Bellator going to Dublin over and over and over again, with probably a lot of the same fighters, because they're either putting on their stars or their American fighters. And is that going to have diminishing returns for one championship? I mean, probably. If you're trying to like you can't be that aggressive and also avoid fatigue. So in one sense, I wonder if the UFC is just like, yeah, I wonder how that's going to go for you. We can go to all 50 states. You can only go to 2. So I'm watching that, and we'll see if any more get approved. I wonder what's really going on behind the scenes, if there's any kind of lobbying from the UFC with different commissions. You see how much influence the UFC has with commissions, where commissions will, I feel like in a lot of situations, almost kind of like cater to the promoter instead of being a little bit more like neutral and putting the fighter health and safety first. It seemed, we've seen different situations where it's like the promoter really, really is trying to stay on the UFC's good side, or, whatever promotion. So I don't know what kind of lobbying's going on behind the scenes, if there is any at all, from the UFC to like try to keep one championship out. I don't know that they're all that concerned about one championship overall, but yeah, I mean, Denver is a big city. It's a really quickly growing city in the U.S., but I don't know if I don't feel like they're losing sleep over it. So, okay, is determining trash talk for media a subjective thing? I'll give you an example. Valentina Shevchenko spent an entire year trash talking 125 in 2022 after almost losing to Santos, saying they're all weak and ducking her, but the media just said that's not trash talk. It's just speaking the truth because she's so good and eloquent. Yeah, I think it is. I think it is somewhat subjective. So apparently if the media likes a fighter or has preconceived notions about them, then they do not trash talk even when they do. Is that just the gist of it? I mean, your media opinions are going to vary across the board. So it depends. I think personally, like, I don't really see like, I would have a pretty wide definition of trash talk, but I also don't see all of it as like a totally like negative thing. So much of it is just sort of like the normal ebb and flow of fighter personalities and people pining for a fight, trying to lobby themselves to get the biggest possible fights and events as possible. So a lot of it, and then once you step into that, once there's like the lobbying side of it, then you can almost start to like question some of the authenticity of it, of like how much of this opinion is really just inflated to try to like really secure your own future. So or sell an event. So there's so many different dimensions to it, and most of it doesn't really bother me. I think that when it bothers me most, it's when it's like just really like the Colby Covington stuff upsets me, just because it's really just like out of thin air, assaulting people's character without very much merit, things like that. But I don't necessarily feel like trash talk is necessarily even a bad thing. You may have a couple media members that may call it, just speaking their mind. But either way, I don't think that it's always bad. It's just kind of the flow of the MMA world. WKG is on their M1 Global's YouTube channel. That's where I'm going to go to watch it. It's also on the WKG Douyin channel, but by far the easy. I mean, unless you're in China, that's probably going to be the easiest. But for everyone outside of China, M1 Global's YouTube channel. I believe it starts at, is it 6 a.m.? Excuse me. I believe it's 6 a.m. Let me just refer to my own website for that information. So yeah, I think I checked the ticketing website and it said the event was scheduled to start at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. So nice, comfortable time in the US, not too early in the morning, before the sun comes up. Did I find the Aaron Bronstetter report about TKO earnings saying that the Apex card and costs are much lower? Well, that wasn't even a Bronstetter report. That was even just that was the Endeavor or the TKO Group Q1 earnings call with Mark Shapiro. So that was a public call. The guy who runs it complaining about the site costs. I didn't hear about him complaining about site costs, but I do think that you will start to see, I'll believe it when I see it, but I do think that we may have hit a tipping point where UFC will start doing some more shows internationally. Already, I mean, if you look at this summer, May has one Apex show, June and July each have one Apex show. But we're getting a little bit more even this summer. In June, we've got Newark, Louisville, and then their International Fight Week show kind of doesn't count, and Saudi Arabia. July, we've got potentially Tampa, and then we've got Manchester. August, we've got Perth. That's kind of a little bit out of our scope there, but I do think that we'll probably get to see a little bit more, but just making sure you don't have any follow-up comments on that. The thing is UFC believes that they have this amazing product that is worth these huge site fees. I think probably what's going on is that the site fees that the UFC is charging have gone up dramatically since before the pandemic, because they believe that the pandemic created all of this demand because it created this this void, this gap of MMA and this hunger for live events. And so I don't know, it's interesting to me how they are both saying everyone wants the UFC to come back, and we've got all these cities that are lining up offers. And if that's true, then why are we still going to the Apex? So I'm wondering if the UFC has set this high bar for site fees that a lot of cities can't even afford. And that's why you're seeing, 2 Apex shows a month sometimes, is just because they are trying to get these cities to bid against each other and charging these huge fees. I don't know if that's ever going to change, and if cities will finally be all right, we'll give you this, I don't know what the site fees are. Singapore, last year, Singapore, I've got it saved here. The site fee for UFC last year at Singapore was $3.2 million. So, these cities putting up these huge fees for the UFC to come in town. It's just interesting. And then you have all these these deals being made where it's a multitude of events, not just one event, but it's multiple. And so the calendar is already filled up by all of these different deals. We saw Saudi Arabia just extended their deal this week as well, going to have at least another show there, probably a bigger show. And so, it is interesting. And I have to believe that all the criticism they've got for the Apex shows is that they're aware of it, that they're hearing it. It may not change the bottom line, but and personally, I don't mind a few Apex shows. I really don't. I don't mind one a quarter, to be honest. Especially put what I would love to see them do with Apex shows more often. They've done this a little bit. If you look closely, a couple cards that are a little more Europe focused. I would love to see them, if they, say they can't get an event going in a certain market, they can still create a card with talent for that market and then air it in the time slot that's good for them. So you saw this with it was the April 6th card. Originally, that was supposed to be Martin Vettori versus Brendan Allen. If you look at that card, there's a lot of European fighters that fought on that card, and it was set to start at an earlier time in the day. So when the UFC Apex was first launched, Dana White was actually touting that. He was saying, we can put on a fight that's geared towards the Russian market. And honestly, that's what you could do, right? Like, you're not getting into Russia anytime soon. So fill this fight card out with Russian fighters, the one that can get to the US, and then air it at 9 in the morning in the US. So, yeah, I don't mind, especially if they expand the seating in the Apex and make tickets available to the general public at semi-reasonable prices. I don't mind the Apex too much, but yeah, we'll see where it goes by the end of the year. What do I think of the TikTok ban? The UFC has a massive following on TikTok, so if it does get banned, lots of viewers will get lost on that platform. Opinions, thoughts, just don't care. The UFC has 14.4 million followers. That would be a huge blow if it does get banned in America. Yeah, so I do have quite a few thoughts on this. Overall, personally, I've held back from really diving into TikTok for two reasons. One, because there's been rumors of all this political stuff for a while, and I don't want to build something that has to get shut down. I feel like for me, there's almost like a 10-year rule before I really like put all my chips in a certain social media site, technology, for the most part. I mean, like, I'll hop on Threads and post a few things, but the other reason is that they just don't really pay their creators very much. So it may not be really worth my time. The thing with the TikTok ban is that so far, I have yet to see anything close to convincing evidence proving that that the political powers that run China, the Chinese Communist Party, that they have any kind of influence in how TikTok is run. That is the main assertion from US politicians, is that this is a way for China to get the data of US citizens and potentially try to influence things in the United States. That is their assertion, and I've yet to see anything convincing from that allegation whatsoever. And so in that regard, I don't really understand or support the ban because of that. And we'll see. I mean, if there may be other things that come to light, but so far, I mean, there's just, I haven't seen what they're talking about. All of these things just are, I don't know, kind of populist opinions about, I think, that are rooted in kind of this US-China rivalry and this big distrust of the Chinese Communist Party. I think a lot of that is fueling that. And I think it's more likely that we do see TikTok banned than it's sold. It sounds like ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, is not moving an inch on being open to selling TikTok to American owners. They don't seem interested in that at all. I think they would they don't have a whole lot to gain from that, except from earning some money from selling it. But otherwise, I think they built it. It's their thing. They would rather just shut it down. So what that's going to mean as far as audience, the thing is if TikTok dies, you're going to see one of two things happen. You're going to see someone, and there's a good chance they may already be fast at work on it, basically creating as close to a TikTok copy as you can while avoiding potential copyright infringement issues. Someone's going to try to just build a TikTok replacement, and people could just flood to that. And the other option, I think, would be, and this would be both positive and negative, is that you're going to see platforms like Instagram and YouTube's, particularly their short space, just blow up because all these TikTok creators, advertisers are looking to, and a lot of them are already starting to reinvest their advertising money into other social media platforms. So you're going to see this huge migration over to these other platforms. There's probably going to be some kind of boom there. But if you're already a creator on Instagram and YouTube, especially YouTube Shorts, that's just going to mean that your competition is going to be a lot greater. There's going to be way more content on those platforms, and your content could get lost a little bit more, especially against people that have really refined a succeeding strategy on TikTok. So ultimately, I don't think it's going to be a good thing. And yeah, I don't know. I guess it's like by the end of the year, they have a year to sell TikTok or else it'll get shut down. It just furthers to the divide, like this East-West China-US divide. And it also just like furthers the social media gap in between the two. I mean, I know TikTok is different from Douyin. They don't share content, but even so, it's like if you ever had hope of like Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or Twitter being public in being usable in China, like, yeah, you can let go of those dreams. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So yeah, don't support the ban. I also, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about TikTok as a whole. Did you see though that some U.S. politicians are even admitting to the fact that they want to ban TikTok because political opinions that differ from their own are spreading a lot more easily among younger generations? That is pretty revealing and really unfortunate as well. So that's a little bit of I think that just shows you kind of where American politics are at. We fight these proxy wars. We want to ban TikTok because we don't trust the Chinese government, but also it's a way that young people are being given like liberal ideas. So you see a lot of like conservative politicians celebrating the idea of TikTok being banned because they see like pro-Palestine viewpoints being spread in TikTok views, which, I mean, dude, like banning TikTok is not going to stop that. Like people are just going to go to Instagram or they're going to go to Facebook or YouTube Shorts. So I don't think that'll really change like the political landscape, the way that people vote a whole lot. But I do think that like, and this is a whole other thing, but like social media does have the power to radicalize us. I definitely believe that social media has the power to push us to one end of the political spectrum or another, because especially algorithmic social media platforms, that is where it's reading what you like and how you interact with the platform, and then it's sending back content back towards you that they think that you'll like and engage with. So if you engage with something that's like, say, on a scale of 1 to 10, you find some content that's like a 2 on the scale of how conservative it is. If you engage, because that's a little bit more like maybe you follow an Instagram account or a TikTok account that's just like mildly conservative, still has a lot of nuance, likes to listen to the other side, but still conservative, a 2 on the scale, then TikTok is going to hear that and say, oh, we saw you like this conservative thing. Here's a 5 on the scale. You engage with that because you're curious, you're interested. Soon it's sending you more and more like content that's polarized to the other side. And a lot of people can see that and create their own boundaries and say like, this is getting a little out of hand. Like they have good discernment. A lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. And they don't hear things from different sides. They don't read long articles. They don't read books written by true experts, things like that. They just watch TikTok or Instagram for their news in little like 30-second 1 minute long sound bites from people that are not experts. They're people just talking off their couch, their various opinions. So I know that's a whole different rabbit hole and topic, but I do think that like they're, especially for teenagers and children, like there's a real cause for concern about how it is affecting them, especially like mental health, depression, all of that stuff that comes with social media. So in that regard, I do support tighter restrictions on not just TikTok, but social media as a whole, to protect younger people. And there's a lot of really sharp teenagers that have, I'm not trying to put every single teenager under the rug here, but yeah, it's interesting. Social media is just always changing. It's never static, man. Are you a fan of Kareem Zidon's Substack called Sports Politica? He's been writing some very interesting things that no one else covers. I don't subscribe to that. I don't actually right now subscribe to any Substacks, but I think if getting a little bit more financial, that is like something that like as the business grows that I really want to invest back into it. But I listen to Kareem Zidon whenever I can. I listen to his YouTube videos or podcasts that he's on, and I do appreciate that for sure. How come Dana White does not attend Road UFC? He attends all the Contender Series fights. It's because they're in Shanghai. That's why. So if they were in the Apex, he would. And I'm guessing he probably went to the Apex shows where they had the finals. But no, it's just because they're in Shanghai. I'm sure, he probably, I don't know if he watches them as a whole, catches up later in the day, or just watches the highlights. But yeah. Too far for the man. No clever pun today. How much of Chaudhry's interview do you actually believe, since he lies and says a lot of hyperbole? Hard to trust a guy who says a bunch of lies about his own product. Yeah, good question. I try to refrain from just being the most cynical person in the world. And I try to I think with Chaudhry, there are some things that it's interesting. I think you just have to listen to him a lot. You have to listen to Chaudhry a lot, and then you have to compare what he says, what he promises, to other reliable sources and to what history shows and what actually happens. At the beginning of the year, Chaudhry said that we're going to go on all these different markets around the world. We're going to go back to Manila this year, and we're going to have 4 shows in the US. Turns out that they had 2 shows in the US. He confirmed in the interview that they're not going back to Manila. And originally we heard Singapore for April. Don't know if there's going to be a Singapore show this year. There's only a couple opportunities for that. And so, yeah, you have to, and sometimes to give him the benefit of the doubt, sometimes you try to make something happen, something falls through. But so you have to hold things with an open hand. When he says we've soft booked 4 shows in the US for 2025, I think for me, that feels to me the same as we have not booked any shows. Soft booked is not the same as booking a date. So with a lot of things, I'm just kind of we'll have to see, and we have to compare what you say will happen to what actually happens. So, he talks about viewership numbers going up and up and up, basically vertical. And that, and the point that he brought up, sorry, my Bluetooth speaker is on the fritz. Let me just disconnect from that. The thing that he said that I thought was interesting was he was like, as long as our viewership numbers are increasing, then everything else will be fine. Because if viewership increases, then there'll be more demand for our events. We'll get better media rights deals. And so that's why you hear him touting viewership is going up and up and up all the time. Now, a promoter, something you have to understand about not just promoters, but a lot of people that are the public face of a company is there could be out of 10 bad things or out of 10 facts about your company, the 10 most important facts, 8 of them could be really, really bad and like showing a declining feature of your company. But there's 2 things that are doing pretty good. What you do as a promoter is you put out those 2 things and you say like, well, these facets are going really, really well. So our company overall as a whole, that's just like basic promoter speak. So just because Chatri is saying these parts of our company are doing well, that doesn't always mean that like everything is doing great. Or maybe you are making more in media rights, but your athlete costs are going up. You have other costs that are going up. Your ticket sales are not as good. Like we saw when for the Qatar show, he said, based on just how this was so funny when he was like, based on what I could observe, the arena looked like it was 90% full, and it wasn't. It was about 60% full in Qatar. And the other funny thing is like that shouldn't, especially he gave that interview days after the fact. There's no need for him to have to like rely on his eyes. Out of anyone, he has access to the attendance numbers from the for the show. So that's interesting. I think I'm learning to take a more nuanced view of certain people like this because it's all so complicated, and you just have to like, you have to get to know people like this based on their interviews and kind of learn their style. I think that there are positive attributes about Chatri Sichodong. There are attributes that he is really good at being a public face in certain ways and emphasizing aspects of the company that he wants to inflate. But I do think that there are things going on under the surface. And I know this because I've talked to managers and fighters that are extremely frustrated with one and paint a totally different story than what's on the surface. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for Nick, the interviewer, all he can do is ask the questions, but you know, it's interesting. I will be interested to see what I'm looking at with one right now is how they book the shows on the second half of the year, particularly the locations. Really curious about that. I'm curious to see what happens with the Qatar deal, if that's going to flourish or fall on its face. I am really curious about that. They've got a really stacked show, like honestly stacked show planned for June 167. That is a pretty stacked show. But it seems like they're going to Bangkok a lot. And so I'm like, that's interesting. How do I watch WLF as well? So again, their Douyin account, you can stream it there. But I think the best way to watch it, which is the way I'm going to watch it, I saw this on Kaposa's on his website. He posted a link to Hunan TV's website. If you've never been to Kaposa's website, it's a little bit similar to mine, except mine is literally just Asian MMA with the addition of like UFC, PFL, Bellator. But go to grabakahitman.com. This is a really good resource. Let me put this up here for you guys. If you go to this website, there's just a full combat sports calendar, including links on how to watch it and times. If you go to, you have to scroll down quite a bit, but if you go to the WLF is on here, and he's got a link to the Hunan TV website. I don't know if that, I tried that link and it just took me straight to the main webpage. So I don't know if you'll have to search around a little bit, which is pretty hard if you don't speak Chinese. So, but that's how I plan to watch it. So I'll try to post a link tomorrow morning. Down this banner. All right. Contender Series is in his personal warehouse in Vegas where he lives, or Road UFC is in Shanghai. Yeah, exactly. Plus, it's a tournament. Contracts aren't handed out just because they win once. Yeah, that's another good point. It's like he's probably just more likely to see who makes it to the finals for sure. What do fighters get out of looking UFC boot? Better contracts. Matt Schnell tried that, and they gave him hard fights. So I don't know if they give you one thing or another. It's also kind of hard to know that, but like, I'm not saying Derek Lewis is a UFC bootlicker, but you definitely, if you're one of the fighters that's like a anytime, anywhere kind of fighter against anybody, I think you may secure a more long-term future with the UFC, even if you go on a losing streak. The UFC loves Derek Lewis. I mean, you got to think that he's one of their favorite fighters. You can put him in any main event, as you see, by putting him against number 15 ranked Rodrigo Nascimento, not even in the apex, but in front of a crowd in St. Louis. You can put Derek Lewis on top of any card. He's probably going to entertain. He's going to give you a lot of sound bites. He doesn't really care who his opponent is. You even heard it. This was so funny at Media Day earlier this week. He was like talking about Joaquin Buckley and how Joaquin Buckley was talking about how he wanted to be the main event of the St. Louis event. And Derek Lewis was like, yeah, I don't want to fight 5 rounds. I keep telling the UFC this, but they keep putting me in main events. Joaquin can take it right now, which I thought was so funny. But Derek Lewis is one of those guys that, at least from what we can tell, he's kind of just going to sign whatever the UFC throws his way. And Derek Lewis could probably lose 5 straight and the UFC would still keep him. So in that regard, like being that kind of fighter gets you a lot of, and not just having an attitude, but also you do have to entertain at the same time. You can't just be a lay in prayer who has that kind of attitude and expect that you're going to be around forever. So seeing on Migu training that they do Road UFC at the Shanghai PI seems to be all wrestling based. It looks like they hired one of Leon Edwards' striking coaches. Is that a good pickup? That coach, is that Mark Timms? I believe he's a striking coach. I'm not sure where he came from. Yeah, he's their striking coach. And he's a newer guy too. That's interesting. I'm just scrolling back to see where he actually comes from. It looks like he used to be a pro fighter. Well, anyways, I'm not going to get lost in looking at this guy's social media profile, but yeah, I think it is, and I think it is good to focus on wrestling as well, considering sometimes, not for all the fighters, especially fighters that are like from Kazakh ethnicity, but a lot of fighters, it does seem like they lack that wrestling base. A lot of good strikers, Sanda strikers in China. So I think it is good that they focus on wrestling for sure. Do I think that one will try to get to Vegas? I think that's a pretty long shot. I think UFC has the Nevada Athletic Commission in the palm of their hand, and I don't think that they're ever going to get to go there. Honestly, say that if report is true and the UFC pulls out of multiple states due to one, does that affect how one does business in other states? We'll see. I mean, kind of going back to what I said earlier, like I don't really have a good way of knowing what that kind of internal pressure is like between UFC commissions and one championship. But yeah, I think there are probably a handful of commissions that UFC has in the palm of their hand, especially if, you have these like tourism boards that are paying tons of money for the UFC to come there. The commission ends up making a lot of money from it. Everyone at the top wins. So there's, I wonder, yeah, it's like, it's been a minute since we've seen another state adopt one's rules. So yeah, I don't think that they're going to be able to honestly gain a whole lot of ground. What one is trying to do, their main tactic right now seems to be to show that they are generating this massive economic impact in Colorado and Atlanta with these huge shows that they're selling out. So that's why you saw them give away comp tickets, a large quantity of comp tickets for their last Denver show. That's why you're seeing them advertise the next Denver show 6 months in advance, and even like putting fights together 6 months in advance and double booking fighters and giving away all these packages, is because they want to show other states, like, if you let us come here, we'll fill up the arena, we'll have an amazing show. So that's what's behind a lot of the double bookings, things like that. So if other states see that and believe that the cost or the value of having one championship, basically like, hey, we'll maybe get one UFC event a year, if that, whereas one championship is saying that they will do all these things, like basically choosing one over the UFC. So I think that's what's probably going on with this, rule set battle, which should not, like, to be clear, none of that should influence a commission's decision to approve a rule set. The only thing that should go into a commission approving a rule set is them making a judgment call on, is this, in a way, MMA is not a safe sport, but does this cross our own personal boundaries of what is going to inflict unnecessary, potentially permanent or life-threatening damage? That's what a commission should be a servant to, is creating fair business practices that protect the fighters, creating good health and safety measures that protect the fighters. Those should be like the top two things at the top of the list of priority, not, well, if they come, are we going to make a lot of money? But that's what one's trying to play at. Why is Ali Noir Ahijang ranked number one at the Shanghai P1 Combine? I've seen him fight. He's not on the level of somebody like Ali or Nuaraji. So that is not, it's not only a skill-based measurement, but it's also an athletic measurement as well. So it's both. I think off the charts, he is an off the charts athletic kind of guy. So that probably got him pretty far up there. And then I would agree. Like I wasn't necessarily putting him as like my number one prospect out of China, but he is a pretty good fighter. From what he also hasn't been all that active over the last couple of years, so it's been a little bit hard to judge that, where other fighters have been more active. So, but that could change depending on his showing this Saturday. Definitely, like, the UFC has their eye on him. If he wins one, maybe two more, then I would think they'd probably just sign him. So yeah, that's why. Have I noticed that TKO and Endeavor just tries to cut costs everywhere? Yes, I have. Why would they flat out admit it while putting up absolute low tier fights to the UFC Apex? A couple reasons. One, because to pay back the debt from buying the UFC that they bought for about $4 billion. So paying back the debt from that is a pretty big motivator to cut back on costs. Also, the antitrust lawsuit. So they posted their first net loss in Q1, but that is pretty much only because of the antitrust lawsuit. On all other metrics, they made more than they have in previous earnings calls that they've revealed to the public. But yeah, I think that is part of it. They are trying to squeeze every last dollar out of media rights deals. In some ways, they've tried to cut athlete costs, and they have also done these Apex shows. So If you're just like, from just this like cold hard business person outlook, they're killing it. If you are just concerned about the bottom line of making the most money, they're doing all the right things. The antitrust lawsuit couldn't have gone better for them. Apex shows are a big win for them. I would say financially in the short term, it's a big win for them. They're not obviously getting a live gate, which is that's not like their main revenue driver. A lot of that I would say is media rights deals. But I think that'll change, especially now that the antitrust lawsuit is behind them. They have 3 payouts of around $100 million each scheduled for the rest of the year. So that'll affect their earnings. But I wonder, and I don't know how close they are to paying back their debt for buying the company, but perhaps you could see that could be a driver of wanting to potentially travel more markets. And there's also the long-term argument of traveling to other markets, building up and satisfying local demand will also drive up media rights deals, which is a reflection of fan demand. So ultimately, I do think that traveling around outside the apex is better for their bottom line in the long run. Short run, the apex is better. Also going away, what do I think of Jose Aldo still being that good coming out of retirement? What a performance against Martinez, UFC 301. Well, yeah, the thing with Aldo is like when he retired the first time, he was not on some really bad losing streak. He was not getting knocked out over and over. And since then, he has stayed active. He's been continuing to train. And so for him, like he's really not falling off any kind of cliff from what I can tell. And he's 36, which is old, especially for bantamweight, but it's not 40, So really like I was not too surprised to see him beat Jonathan Martinez. For him, I would not, I don't know. I have to think about this, but I wouldn't hate him being fast tracked to a title shot. At least I wouldn't hate him being set up against like a top bantamweight contender for a number 1 contender fight. Now, I did hear, I forget who the interview was with, but Corey Sandhagen did say that his fight with Umar Nurmagomedov, if he wins that Hunter Campbell with UFC, told him that would guarantee him a title shot against the champ. So, and I think that's right. But Aldo, like, yeah, how cool would that be to see him get one more title fight in there, especially at bantamweight? Would love to see that. Imagine like Aldo versus Sean O'Malley. Imagine Aldo versus Corey Sandhagen. These would be amazing fights. But I guess he's a free agent. He probably has like a 6-month matching period. But some people even brought up him going to one championship, which to fight Demetrius Johnson, which the only problem with that, besides being locked in one of the worst contracts in mixed martial arts, the problem with that is that Aldo probably cuts a lot of weight to get down to 135, whereas Demetrius Johnson is fighting, yes, at 135, but he is moving up from cutting down to flyweight to 125. So I don't know I feel like if Aldo were to fight in one championship, he'd have to fight in their 145-pound weight class. And even then, it's like he had to cut a significant amount of weight to get down to 145. So I don't know if that would really work for him. I mean, him versus Fabricio Andrade would be pretty cool, but I would favor Aldo in that. Devil's Advocate. Hey, we love that here. Valentina assaults other fighters' characters all the time, and MMA Junkie and Fighting always say she's not trash talking. It's above her to do that. I'd argue she does the same amount of trash talking during interviews, but because she's loved by the media, except for slack, she can do nothing wrong. I mean, yeah, it's a part of the MMA self-promotion. And so it doesn't, it just doesn't really get under my skin a whole lot. It's crazy how much of an advantage Chinese fighters have with these replacements. Like Yun Feng and Ibugola don't deserve these opportunities. I'm fine with Ibugola getting the opportunity. He has won 2 straight. Really experienced guy, JCK champion, former champion. But Li Yunfeng does seem like a little bit of a stretch to me. It's on the one hand, it is nice that since they have these events in China, that they do have a lot of people that they can choose from just to hop in. But I agree. I would love to see a couple more fighters from outside of China. I mean, how hard is it for a Korean fighter or a Japanese fighter to get a visa to fight in China? Can it be that hard? I don't know. It's definitely an advantage. And also fighting at the UFC PI in Shanghai is an advantage as well. I'll have to admit that. But I agree. I would not mind them grabbing some more Korean or Japanese fighters. How angry will the media get if Weili takes the next year off? Saw her post where she said the last 2 camps were hard on her and wants time off. Justified. There's a 42-minute Migu interview where they keep asking about her next fight, and she said she's not even thinking about that. Well, to be fair, the media gets angry at the media, and again, you're painting pretty broad brushstrokes there, but I do see some media opinions that are frustrated with other fighters taking long periods of time off as well. I don't feel like she's ever held a weight class hostage at all. I mean, look at the John Jones situation. That is holding a weight class hostage. I think anytime a champion is like taking time off when there's a huge queue and they're talking about opportunities way outside their weight class, I think that's when you invite the most scorn. John Jones is pissing off so many people right now with all of his comments. And I mean, myself included, it's so upsetting to see him like basically like campaign for all these other fights, except for the guy that holds the interim belt, and just devalue this interim belt, saying like, well, like, I don't know. I mean, do people really want that? Is it really a big fight? Dude, it does not matter. He's the interim champion. That's how this goes. I don't see the kind of logjam at strawweight where that kind of wrath would be incurred, or the situation. So I don't expect that you would see a whole lot of opinions wanting that. I mean, there is a lot of excitement for a Zhang versus Tatiana Suarez fight. And so, you could see people get restless about that, but also Suarez is coming off an injury. So, I feel like I honestly, I even feel like one strawweight title fight a year is enough to keep the division moving, because there aren't a whole lot of players at strawweight. Now this year, I do hope we get Suarez versus Zhang this year, just because, it feels like that fight should happen, even if it's December, I hope that it does happen this year, but yeah, I mean, Zhang is, I mean, I hate to be the one to say this, but she's getting a little older. She's like, what, 35 years old. So, I don't know how much she has left in her career. She pushes herself really, really hard in training camps. Like, I mean, most people do, but no, I don't hate it at all. I would say like, yeah, let's try to get this in by the end of the year. Do I think a lot of the UFC success is by accident, since most of their decisions don't make sense most of the time? I would argue a lot of their decisions do make sense, but from a different point of view. Not everything makes sense, and not everything makes sense to me or to you. But, when we're talking about Apex shows, a lot of those decisions don't make sense to us. But from the bottom line, which is like, we've got to pay back this debt and take care of this fighter antitrust lawsuit, it makes sense from that perspective. It makes sense from a short-term perspective. But in a lot of other things they do, I think do make a lot of success, and they also just have a stranglehold on the business to where like the UFC brand just is so valuable in a way that other promotions it's not valuable. So I wouldn't say it's by accident, but just all of the architecture of the whole industry is slanted in their favor. So they can do things that feel like coasting to us, having Apex shows, and still dominate the market. So I don't think it's by accident, but I think it's by design, I would say. To add to the TikTok thing, the CEO is from Singapore. Yeah. That's the other thing is just the ignorance of a lot of United States politicians that assumed that this CEO was a Communist Party member when he's not even Chinese. So there's definitely a lot of ignorance for sure. Isn't that a freedom of speech issue? They want to ban TikTok because they want to make it American. So freedom of speech, the only thing, there's like the essence and spirit of freedom of speech, and then there's actually the law of freedom of speech. And the law is just that Congress cannot tell you what you can or can't say. But if they feel like the argument with TikTok, at least the alleged argument, is that it is a national security issue. It's not even a freedom of speech issue. So I don't really understand TikTok's argument that like banning TikTok would be a violation of freedom of speech. So it's incumbent on American politicians to really prove that it's a national security, or just get enough people to vote on it. So I think there's a lot of motivations of like, yeah, we want, and China does this too with their social media platforms of like, we want to empower American businesses rather than China. And you could argue, well, they don't do this with other countries. Well, yeah, because there is this weird rivalry between the US and China that I don't understand. But yeah, you're right. I think that is another thing. You got to think like Meta would love for TikTok to get banned. It's only good for them, right? As I know, as you know, Joe Rogan is not my favorite commentator or podcaster. Do you think a podcast like that can sway MMA opinions through generalities, unlike other small accounts that discuss nuance? Yeah, I mean, Joe Rogan is an incredibly influential personality. And I would say, yeah, he does make a lot of generalizations. He also makes allegations that I don't think are always well researched, but he at least has, what has gained him trust is that he is willing to uncover kind of alternate opinions or viewpoints on things. And because of that, people trust him because they feel like he's someone that does provide nuance. And so he has a lot of, which I don't even think is always a bad thing, to invite people whose opinions are a little bit more off the grid or out of the mainstream. I don't think that's always a bad thing, but you just have to realize like this is one of the most like beloved, trusted, because he basically like embodies so much of the classical view of masculinity. Joe Rogan is, I mean, by now an elder figure that people see as someone who has a lot of life experience that can sit down and have a frank conversation with them. At least they feel that way. And that's so much. And he's also like a physical freak, knows about self-defense, jiu-jitsu, has done all these interesting things, kind of this Renaissance man or world's most interesting man. And so because of that, he is sort of fulfills a lot of masculine ideals, and that's why he's so trusted. So yeah, and he always will be, and he's always going to have a spot in the UFC, and he is, yeah, one of the most trusted males. Like, okay, imagine this. Imagine if Joe Rogan ran for president. you may dismiss it right away, but we did have Donald Trump win an American presidential election. Joe Rogan, I don't know if he'd be able to win. He'd probably run as like a libertarian, but or like some third party platform. But dude, just the backing that he has is ridiculous. And it's sometimes even like bipartisan across both sides of the aisle. Definitely more on the right than the left, but I wonder how that would go, honestly. Saying, I feel like TikTok has the most unstable user base, conspiracies, dumb challenges, etc., etc. I've also heard TikTokers barely get paid. They do, unless you're at the very like top, like 0.5% of TikTok, or maybe even less. You're not going to get paid much money for TikTok. And yeah, the TikTok's algorithm is really, really aggressive. And so if it rewards you for having really strong opinions. So that, I think, is why it gives rise to so much political polarization, for sure. Fair. Listen to Chatri a lot, not something I would like to do. It's true. I don't blame you, but being in the media, and since one championship connects to Asian MMA in less so than it used to, but because it does, I do put up with interviews and just listen to them just in like just so if I have an opinion about one championship, then I can add a little bit more color to it. But I feel you there. I feel like Whaley is treated as a respectable champion among MMA media. I feel like whenever I hear people talk about number one woman in the world, she's pretty much the only name that I hear. So I feel like she does get that respect. One thing that I feel like the biggest thing that she could do to connect to the media and fans is make herself more available for media and interviews. I think if she did that, then a lot of this kind of conversation would change a lot, honestly. Do I like TKO as the new holding company? I feel like as a fan of the sport that the UFC product has gotten worse, bar a few good pay-per-views. We've had 2 good pay-per-views in 298 and 300. And 299 was pretty good too. Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, well, TKO, that really goes back to Endeavor, just because like TKO is a lot of the same people. Like when they formed TKO, it really wasn't that different of a group of Endeavor. You know, they probably added some board members there, some different decision makers, but I think the UFC, it's a complicated question because there's things that I really do enjoy and appreciate. I mean, UFC 300 was a total blast. There are still, and there will always be moments that are a huge blast. It's hard to, I mean, yeah, the Apex shows I think are one of the biggest things that people point to, but I wonder is as like the UFC's financial burdens are less with antitrust lawsuit and paying back debt, if you're going to see a lot of those things go away. I mean, another big complaint about UFC right now is ESPN Plus, the insufferable nature of the app, the service. Sure, it's not great. Always catering to the North American market, especially in terms of pay-per-view. That's a big complaint that people have. I don't think that a lot of even like the matchmaking has changed a whole lot. I feel like overall UFC matchmaking is good. I don't actually think that like money fights and wacky freak show fights, I don't think that has changed at all, even since the early days of the UFC. I think that's always kind of been going on in a way. So I don't know. I mean, I would reframe the question if I could to just say Endeavor as a whole. And I don't think it's changed a whole lot. I actually would prefer just a few less shows. And it's like, you have to think like people often blame like oversaturation on Endeavor, but oversaturation was actually a hot topic even before Endeavor bought the UFC. So I think some of the things that people associate with Endeavor actually were going on before the company bought the UFC. It's just that, and things like fighter pay, some of these really like cost constrictive things that people complain about. And I do too. I'm with you on a lot of those complaints, but I don't know. It's complicated. And I think it's also still in process. So I don't really know how to answer that question. It is what it is. And I think that they have brought more resources to the table to be able to grow and expand the UFC product in ways that could be fan friendly. I just wish that all of the economic growth that the UFC is seeing very, very like immediately you could see it trickle down to the fighters. The trickle down effect overall in economics almost doesn't exist. The trickle down effect alleging that, well, if the top of the company makes more money, then everyone else will make more money. That doesn't always happen. I think you are seeing fighter pay as a baseline level rise a little bit, but the share has stayed the same, if not gotten less. So I would love to see the economics of fighter pay change dramatically with their increase in revenue. Mark Timms is from City Kickboxing. That's right. He has a YouTube channel called Pro Striking. Has worked with Leon in the past. Says he has a 2-year contract with Shanghai as a striking coach. We'll see what happens. I saw Ghost roasting a guy on Twitter saying that Umar was ducked by Font and Moraes and telling Ghost he had no sources. Why do people believe that Umar is ducked when he's clearly not? Ducking is something that goes on almost entirely in fan imagination. I think that it happens almost seldom, honestly. People decline fights because of injuries, timing, and for other personal reasons, but it usually gets passed off as ducking. So, yeah. People are signed to fight. Said Umar's ducked when he's clearly not, since people have signed to fight Umar. But the broadcast crew and Ali, his manager, seem to push that narrative. Why are people dumb enough to believe that? I don't know, because they don't know how the sausage is made, I would say. Since you don't know either, Weili's listed date of birth on UFC is not her real one. Her real date of birth is September 20th, 1991. August 31st, 1989 is due to lunar calendar. It's the same thing with Song Yadong. His listed age is not his real age. In China, especially in the 90s, parents wanted their children to go to school earlier since they are not honest with the listed date of birth. Yeah, that's pretty confusing, man. So her real date of birth being, what you're saying is that she's younger than she is listed as. Okay, well then, yeah, that would make her turning 33 this year, being 32 currently. So she's still totally in her prime. So, okay, so I could take back what I said about her getting older, but I don't know. Maybe adjust training camp strategy. If you're pulverizing yourself in training that much to where like you can't fight with that kind of regular, maybe it's time to train a little bit differently. I can't be one to say how a fighter should or shouldn't train, but I don't know. Maybe that's worth looking at. Yes, exactly. All right. Well, that wraps up today's show. Appreciate all of your participation. Appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Looking forward to watching WKG, WLF, One Pride this weekend. AFC also has a Vietnam show as well, but stay tuned to MMAecosystem.com and my socials for updates on that. And until next time, enjoy the fights.